Today, I have a special guest, a lovely woman who is also my business mastermind. I got to meet her in person. Her name is Diane Flores, and she is hot shit. I love following her online. I'll be sure to include her Instagram profile so you can follow her too. But her bio here is from single teen mom at the age of 16 to IFBB bodybuilding pro and multiple business owners. She has overcome a lot of life and body hurdles. And I'm really excited to have her here today because there's a few topics that we want to get into, but I think you are really going to enjoy this episode. So I'm going to stop talking and being awkward with my intro here. And I'm just going to have Diane introduce herself. So welcome, Diane.
Oh my gosh,
Who
Tina.
are
I
you?
love it.
What are you all about? Give us all the details.
I love it. It's funny because I also am a podcast host, so I get the awkward intro thing. So thank
Yes.
you for having me. Like Tina said, thank you for saying I'm hot shit. I appreciate that. But it wasn't always that way. And I know we'll get into some of my story and whatever, you'd like me to share. But I am an IFBB pro bodybuilder, which, like Tina said, has taken me over a decade to get to. I think I was really chicken to attempt for quite some time, but I got my pro card. I own a all women's fitness studio. It's personal training, so I have seven trainers that train women there, and it's local to my city. And then I have the podcast, and this all kind of started as an accident, believe it or not, my business. It was like, let's do this fun thing, my sister and we started a pole dancing business. I don't know if you knew that.
No, I did not know that.
Yes. So we started as a pole dance. I don't know if you've heard of pole dancing for fitness, but it is a thing. And in 2007, we decided to do that. We had zero experience, zero clue what we were doing. And I just called my sister one day. I'd seen this thing online and I said, like, hey, we should do this thing. We should teach people how to pole dance. And she's like, pool? We don't have a pool. I'm like, no, pole, like stripper pole. And she's like, I don't know how to dance like that. And I said, well, I don't know how either, but I'm sure we could learn. And the rest is kind of history because that was the seed that planted for me in, doing something different. I was in the medical field for 10 years, mom of three, and so eventually the business morphed from pole dancing studio to adding in a group fitness component because my pole dance girls were needing to get stronger and they were struggling. Because if you've never pole danced, it is a lot harder than it looks. I know people think it's just like shaking your booty around the pole, but it is like a lot of strength-based stuff. So we added that, and then eventually COVID came, and then I just decided that I wanted to go all in on like my dream, which was to create a personal training studio for women who are intimidated by a traditional gym setting, going into the weight room, and oftentimes hold themselves back from merging over into that world because they are intimidated. And so that's where my whole passion lies, is getting women to cross over that fear and conquer their body goals.
I love that. And I love your story. I feel like there's so many great things that you've done that obviously have brought you to this place. And one thing that you wrote, as far as like your bio and all of that, was just where you've come from as far as this health journey goes. Like you mentioned struggling with depression and social
Mhm.
anxiety. You weighed over 200 pounds. And, years later, I mean, it's like I was saying, you're a hot shit now. So like, what was life like then? And
Yeah.
then do you want to talk a little bit about that transition? Like, how did you get here from that really like dark place?
Yeah, absolutely. So I got pregnant very young. I'm going to make this a shorter story for you, but I got pregnant when I was 16. And the only experience I had at that point was PE, right? And in PE, I had one friend in high school, literally the entire time. And we decided to sign up for weight training in junior year to get out of running because we didn't want to run. And so her and I were the only girls in the weight training room. And I just remember very distinctly in that class just thinking, this is really cool. I feel really strong. I can keep up with the boys. Like, I remember my first exercise was a lat pull down. I'm like, never forget it. So that was where like my first sort of like taste of weight training started. And then I, got pregnant back to back. I had two kids by the time I was 18. And, my life started. I was a single mom. I was always dabbling in some kind of fitness. At least I tried. Um, jazzercise, step aerobics, kind of dabbling in all the things. I could never stay on a diet for more than like 2 weeks, I feel like. Um, I I distinctly remember the cabbage soup diet. I don't know if you've ever heard of that, but I was in the medical field and it's like a diet they give heart patients before they undergo surgery to like drop weight rapidly. So, I was dabbling in all the crazy random things. Um, at some point, I ended up getting really, really sick and I was very depressed. I was on antidepressants for almost 10 years. My weight got up to 200 pounds. I was eating, and this is a funny story that I tell often on the podcast. I would order a double quarter pounder with cheese, extra greasy from McDonald's. Like that's a thing. We would go through the drive-through, me and my boyfriend at the time, and we would say, like, can you give us the greasiest, juiciest, like patty? Are you like cringing so hard right now?
Just like,
So just to give you context, like my family is like most of them they have health issues, they're obese. Like my dad still smokes a pack a day and carries a Pepsi around. My mom's got high blood pressure, diabetes, heart condition, things like that. So my whole family. And as I started raising my kids and kind of getting more into fitness and seeing how it made me feel, I started to see things in magazines. At the time, I don't know if you've ever seen the Oxygen magazine, but back then it was like really popular. I had every magazine from that publication. So I was carrying it around every time we moved, and I'd rip out the workouts and the diets in there, and I would just kind of figure out my own things. And then eventually, like at one point, people started asking me, like, "Hey, your body's changing. Like things are happening. Like, what do you do?" Like I kept getting asked, "What do you do? What do you do?" And then it just inspired me to want to learn more and kind of branch out that way. So that's really how it started. And eventually, I decided when I started this pole dance business that I needed to get more. I needed to get more aware of the issues that women were facing with their diet and their exercise to help more people because I only had my little base of knowledge. So that's where it really started spinning off. And then I decided to chase my passion or my dream of bodybuilding, found a local coach and did my first show. And I was absolutely hooked. So, yeah, I mean, it's kind of like the story, the long story condensed, but it has been quite an experience of trial and error, lots of failure, macros, meal plans, lots of cardio, no cardio. I mean, everything possible. I feel like I've done every diet and workout known to man, CrossFit, Zumba, everything.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And I can relate with that too. I feel like a lot of this, like getting healthy or losing weight or whatever your health goal is a lot of that trial and error and failure. I talk about my failures all the time. You just have to keep failing and just keep moving forward. I mean, that's like the best way to do it. But when you were going through all of this, was there almost like a turning point or almost like a catalyst or pain point that you were just like, I need to make a change? I don't know how I'm going to get there,
Mhm.
but I'm going to figure it out. Was there like one thing or just like a moment in time where you're just like, I got to do something differently? Like no more greasy burgers.
Right. No, actually, that's a great question. I had my years of greasy burgers and like waking up and eating Entenmann's donuts for breakfast or like powdered donuts. That was like my go-to all through, middle school, high school. My dad was raising me. My parents got divorced. So he was just like throwing burritos, frozen burritos at me, fish sticks, mac and cheese. Nothing was like home cooked. And I love my dad to death. He was doing his best, but I ended up getting really sick with excruciating stomach pains. And this is kind of a funny story because at the time that this happened, I had already had my first son or my first child, so my son, and it was in between my son and my daughter when this all started to happen. And I didn't have a family doctor because I just had an OBGYN. I hadn't seen a doctor in many years. And so I had to go to my pediatrician when I was 16, 17, after I had my son with my son, but I was actually the one getting cared for because I didn't have a family doctor. So they were kind of putting me through some tests, and it ended up that my gallbladder was on the brink of explosion. And
Mhm.
I had been suffering with excruciating gut wrenching, like vomiting, other issues that we won't get into. And they did an ultrasound, said your gallbladder is about to explode. And so they rushed me over after months of putting me on like random therapies without testing to see what was really going on. They just kind of threw pills at me. They finally figured out what it was, and I had to be in the hospital for 7 days. They said, your gallbladder is about to explode. We have to bring down the infection, the inflammation. So that was a huge wake up call being in the hospital as a result of my diet, really, mainly is what we were hearing at the time. So after that, I became a lot more aware. Then I got pregnant with my daughter, still at a very young age. But with that pregnancy, it was much different. Like I was running when I was like 8 months pregnant with her. I was just like, I'm not going to let myself get sick. And I realized the power of food and nutrition after I had my gallbladder removed. And I started to sort of play around with different diets and things like that. And I started to feel so much better. And that was really the tipping point, at least for me, nutritionally speaking.
Yeah, the health scare stuff for sure. I mean, same thing. I mean, I was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis in 2011. And I mean, now, I'm a functional practitioner, and this is like
Yeah.
exactly what I do and what I care about and like how I want to help women. But I always wonder, as much as I hate having UC because I've struggled with it for more than a decade, I'm like, well, this is kind of the path that I took. I don't know if I would have
Mhm.
taken this path if there wasn't a health scare. So
Most
yeah, sometimes
definitely.
like I think something big or dramatic has to happen in order for you to, pay attention to your nutrition and to start living your life differently. So, when you made these changes or, you had this health scare, like what were some of like the first things that you did? Because I think sometimes ladies, we know we need to change, but a lot of times it just seems so overwhelming. So
Mhm.
for somebody that's listening right now, do you have almost just kind of like the first thing you did or just some like easy things that you can kind of ease into this health journey? Because I think a lot of times like we just try to do like everything, and if you
Yeah.
do everything all at once, it's like really hard to stick with it. So I wasn't sure if
Mhm.
there was kind of like a few things that you started to do and then things kind of snowballed.
Yeah, I honestly at that point just started becoming really interested in nutrition. So what I did was I tried diets, right? Like I tried, like I said, the cabbage soup diet. I tried all these things and I couldn't stick to anything because it was so restrictive and regimented and it was so far removed from the way that I was eating that it was like an all or nothing approach. And I didn't know it at the time, but in hindsight now, I'm like, okay, that doesn't work now that I know what I know. And it makes sense as to why I couldn't stick to anything. So what I really started doing once I got past that phase of like these diets are just not for me, the all-in, approach, is I started swapping out things that I was eating that were like really high in fat or really high in calories for other items that were similar in taste, but like a fraction of,
Mhm.
the macros and also were better for me overall. So if I wanted pancakes rather than just eating like Bisquick, I looked up recipes for like how to make protein pancakes, right? And I just started doing things like that. Like I got on this kick where I really loved muffins and like muffins were just it's like a pretend cake, right? So I would find recipes for muffins and I created like a whole batch of recipes and was developing a program and didn't even really know it, because this was like my experimentation. So that's really my first tip is not thinking that everything has to go out the window and you have to like embody this entire new thing that's so far removed from what you already do. It's like, where can you make little tiny changes? Because all of those small changes over time yield huge results. And I think we're just so used to instant gratification and like doing things and like, I need it today, where it's like, if you just embody the tortoise route where you're like, I'm going to take some time and like do these things, you're going to be able to do it longer. It's going to be more sustainable. And honestly, it's just default now for me, So it's just become part of my lifestyle.
Yeah, and that's a huge part of it. And I think you hit the nail on the head there. It's just everybody wants these like quick results. And there's almost like this desperation for the weight to come off. But like you can do all these short-term extreme things. And sure, like you might get some like initial results, but it's just not sustainable. But it's a hard sell for people to be like, you need to take some time and figure out what works for you and
Such
like
a hard
find your
sell.
own path. And of course, like that's why we exist as coaches. Like we love helping people, find their path. But anyways, I'm just glad you mentioned a few of those things there and kind of want to switch gears here because the thing
Hmm.
I really want to talk to you about is this
Hmm.
whole bikini competition stuff. Because when
Yes.
Diane and I were at dinner on the most recent mastermind event, I was asking her all these questions about it because I was like, oh, maybe this would be a fun project for me to do. And then we got into more of the details, and I was like, I don't know if I want to do that.
Hmm.
So I would love to hear just kind of like the realistic side of it. So do you want to just talk about like how you got into it, how you discovered this
Sure.
world? We'll just
Yeah.
go from
So
there.
I found the world of bodybuilding through Oxygen magazine 20 plus years, 20 years ago. For those that are, over 40 and read that magazine, you probably remember at the very back, they would have articles about girls that competed. And so I would see these women and I saw their like strong bodies and they had like curves and tone and they were sculpted. And I thought like, I'm going to do that someday. And I just kept saying that and I kept like manifesting it in my brain. And then eventually, when I found a coach locally, I said, okay, if I can find somebody locally, I'm going to do it. I felt like I needed somebody locally. And this was 12 years ago and 13 years ago. And so I found him and we started that process. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. Like, I thought I knew because I'd read and seen things in magazines, but I really didn't know what I was getting myself into. So, yeah, it's been a journey. I've competed 16 times and it's a lot, and I've coached hundreds of women at this point to get on stage, and my team has as well. Um, yeah, I mean, it's a beast. It's its own sport, and there are a lot of like rules and categories and things. So it's the thing I would advise if anybody is interested in ever doing that is definitely finding a coach. If you can find somebody locally, that's always great, but do your research because hiring a coach, but on just price could be a very detrimental mistake to your health. So I just like to caution people if you're going to compete, make sure who you are hiring to coach you is educated on women's health and understanding the process of bodybuilding and all the preventative measures that you need to take to make sure that your health is intact when you come out of a show because it is a very rigorous and demanding process. Yeah.
And
And
yeah,
I'm
there's,
open
oh,
to
sorry.
talking about whatever you want. I'm an open book when it comes to that stuff. So,
Yeah, and I kind of want to know just like a little bit more about like the ins and outs or like what does like the typical preparation look like or the timing or how things have to change or do you need to prepare for that stage? I guess some of those
right.
details.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I love that. So generally it's a little bit different for everybody. It depends on what your starting point is. But as a coach, what I do is I usually will do a physique assessment if somebody's interested in coaching with us. And what I look at is what their end goal is. So if they say they want to compete, I ask them, okay, what's your timeline? And then we sort of reverse engineer that, much like any goal that you would have, like with a client, a weight loss goal. However, getting ready for a show is way different. And I have people ask me all the time, well, I just want to look like that, but I don't want to do a show. Can I just have you coach me to look like that, but not do a show? And I tell everybody, you will not stick to this as just like I want to look good in a bikini goal, unless you have the show date, like a fire under your butt telling you have to do the things, you're going to quit at some point. I've seen it time and time again. Um, so what that looks like is it for me as a coach, if I've never worked with somebody, so let's say you, for example, Tina, you said, I want to do a bikini show. I would say, okay, you and I've never worked together. I want to work with you for 30 weeks to make sure we get you dialed in and get you ready for your show. And what that looks like is the first, 4 weeks, we're trying to figure out what your maintenance calories are. So you're logging and tracking and I'm devising a training program that is specific to your body. So in bodybuilding, they are judging off of criteria, and a lot of people miss the mark on this. They think, well, I'm just going to get in the gym and I'm just going to train everything. And I think when you're very beginner, there is validity to that. However, if you've been in the gym playing around for a minute, working out and whatnot, I would want to look at your body specifically, Tina, and say, okay, here's where you are. You need to look like this according to the bodybuilding rules. Maybe I say, okay, your arms are really developed. We don't need to spend a lot of time on that, but we need to focus on your glutes or your quads, or we need to build your core out some more. So I devise a very detailed program so it's not cookie cutter, and a lot of coaches do cookie cutter. And then we work with, your training plan, your cardio, and we take you week by week to make sure that you're hitting that target. So I generally know, depending on what your height is, what you should weigh on stage, give or take a few pounds, just because what I see women come on stage at. But it also depends on how much muscle you have. So we would play around with that and kind of get you geared up to hit that target. So let's say you're 5'3" right now, I'm guessing, and you want to hit stage. I would say, okay, well, we probably need to get you about 118 to 123 pounds. I know, right?
That's
Yes.
really lean.
And you think there's no way that's possible. And I'll tell you, I do it I can get it, I can make it happen, but it is going to be painful, right? You're going to be hungry. You are going to skip social settings. You're not going to drink alcohol. You can't miss a training session. You can't miss a cardio session, right? So it's a lot. It's a lot. And as you get closer to your show, your cardio could go up to, I mean, I have some girls that were doing 2 hours of cardio and also weight training a day for weeks and weeks and weeks on end, and eating maybe 1,100 calories.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a lot. So it's funny because I talked about this, I think, on one of my reels recently, how when you decide to do a show, you then become like a newborn baby. You have to eat every 3 hours. You have to be sleep, you have to get your rest. Like, you have to be very structured and regimented, because on the days when you're not, and you wake up and you're cranky and you're tired and you don't feel like doing it, you have to do it anyways. So then it's just, by the nature of the demand of what it requires, being very structured is incredibly helpful. And you have to be on point with that if you want to be successful.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so, like, for something like this, I'm like, yeah, you definitely need a coach for this. This is not something
Yeah.
that you can just kind of wing it or like do on your own. And
Yes.
especially with like like having a coach that has the expertise, that understands like what you need to do. And I
Right.
also think that it's probably like a certain type of person that would do really well with this. And like as
Yeah.
you're talking it out, I'm like, I don't think I can do this. I like food too much.
Yeah. Yeah.
But is there like a type of woman that would probably do well with something like this if
Yes.
she wanted to do this?
Absolutely. So I always say, when I get asked this question, if you're already doing like 90% of the things that are required for you to already do when you decide to compete. So if you're in the gym training with weights, at a minimum 4 days a week for hypertrophy training, right? Not like I go do group classes or I take a spin class. Like, you're in the gym, you're in the weight room, you're moving some weight, right? If you already maybe kind of do some cardio, or you're not completely cardio averse, right? You can bet you're going to have some cardio in your plan. If you already know how to track macros and have either eaten off a macro plan or a meal plan, and you know how to log and those kinds of things, then those few things already have you 10 steps ahead of somebody who has not done any of those things. And trust me when I say, I get people all the time who want to do this as a bucket list goal,
Mhm.
and they reach out to me, and I have to give them a hard reality check, and like, you're going to need to work with me for more than 30 weeks, because I need to make sure you understand like how much is going to be required of you. So I think
Yeah.
if you're already doing most of those things and it's been in the back of your head as far as like wanting to achieve this goal, it's doable. But like Tina was saying, like, she's like, no, I already know I wouldn't want to do this. If you if you plan it out methodically and you start working with somebody and give yourself enough time, there are ways to mitigate the possibility of having to do hours of cardio, right? Like, I have worked girls' metabolism up for 6 months, 8 months, to where they're eating almost 3,000 calories a day and maintaining still like low levels of body fat and are still pretty lean. And the reason why that's important is because when they want to prep, they're not starting a prep only eating 1,500 calories.
Mhm.
So I can trim 1,000 calories off of their diet, and they're eating 2,000 calories, and we see the scale move and they can stay there for a while. So it's really in your best interest to not be doing excessive cardio and not be doing extreme dieting when you're ready to go into a prep, because there's you just have to add more on there for cardio and you have to take more away for food. And I won't do that. I turn people away all the time for that when they come to me and they're like, yeah, I've been doing this and I eat about 1,200 calories a day and I've been doing this for 6 months and I do 45 minutes of cardio on the stairs 4 times a week, 5 times a week. I'm like, okay, great. You want to work with me? We're going to have to reverse you out of all of that and then feed you. And then we can talk about doing a show because you will be ruined. I will ruin your thyroid. You will have a distorted relationship with food and it will be unpleasant.
Mhm. Now you're speaking my language. Because
Yes.
this is what we do with our clients. I mean, they'll come to us, same thing, eating 1,200 calories, running 5 miles a day, and they're like, I can't lose weight. And really, the only way out of that metabolic madness is to start eating more and lifting weights and all that. But let's talk about that idea of like working up your metabolism,
Hmm.
because I think this is something that ladies really have a tough time understanding, that sometimes you do almost have to like eat more and prioritize certain things first before you go into a fat loss phase or
Hmm.
a bikini competition or something like that. But we talk about that a little bit. So you have like a new
Yes.
client and you're like, we really got to get your calories and
Hmm.
your muscle mass up and all that.
Yes. I wish I could scream this from the rooftops because it happens so often. I mean, right now I'm in the middle of a 12-week online transformation program that I'm taking, 50 women through. And some of them are local, some of them are online. And I'm seeing this constantly where it's like, oh, I don't know, eating more is scary and this freaks me out. And this is way more carbs than I'm used to, and so on and so forth. But I can think of one client, for example, wonderful lady from Texas in her 50s, that hired me and was running nonstop. She was getting 16 to 18,000 steps a day. Okay. Um, was living on 1,400 calories. And so we had to reverse her out of that, but it wasn't a hard stop because her body's acclimated to that. And I knew if we drastically dropped that, she'd put on body fat. So we slowly worked her out of that. We backed her out of her cardio week after week. I dropped her steps down, which was the hardest thing for her to do because she just was like, thought more was better. So we got her down to like 12,000 was our negotiation. And so it was bringing her down over the course of weeks, and it depends. It depends on how long you've been doing it for. I mean, I can do this turnaround with some clients in 2 months. In fact, I just did with another client of mine who is going to be competing this summer. We had 2 months to work her food back up, and we did. And then we cut it back down, and she's dropping weight now. So it's a game of patience, which we don't like, but it is the best route for you to have longevity with your results, honestly.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. And it's like such a hard sell for people because, like we were saying, everybody wants those quick results. And, there's so many extreme things that you can do to lose weight. But if you really want kind of like a long-term solution, sometimes you got to do things a little bit differently.
Most
But
definitely.
back to the bikini competition stuff, because I'm still very curious about this.
Yeah, ask away. I love it.
Because that's like a little personal, but like,
No, I do the same thing
oh,
on my podcast.
yeah,
Selfishly ask all the
also
questions.
picking your brain because I love this stuff. So with like a new client, so you're really like the first steps in that like 30 weeks is really kind of like building the muscle, boosting the metabolism, and then from there really starts that whole, I guess, cut process. Is that kind of how things work?
Very good question. So actually, the 30 weeks that I recommend when I work with somebody, the 30 weeks is where we're going to go into that cut. So when I work with somebody, I'm like, okay, we're going to do a 30-week prep because we've never prepped before. If I've got a client to that point, it is under the assumption that they've already been training for years on their own
Mhm.
and they are just now doing a show, or they have had experience before, they've done a show before, something like that. For somebody who has never competed and wants to compete, I always recommend that they need to have been weight training at least a year consistently in the style of training in which bodybuilding requires, which is hypertrophy training. So if somebody comes to me and they're like, "Oh yeah, I've been doing, body pump classes for a year. I know how to lift weights." I'd say, "No. while that's great for like health benefits and keeping you feeling fit and active, this is a sport that requires you to have significant amount of muscle because you will be compared against other women, and that's what they're looking for. So if you have not built that, we need to spend time doing that. And you know, Tina, that's a process that takes
Mhm.
time. Like muscle is not built overnight. It comes on much slower than when you want to drop body fat. So that for me is important that I work with somebody for a year in a build phase if they've never done that before, where we're increasing calories, we're doing programming that is geared towards, putting on muscle in whatever area groups they, body parts they need. And then once we've done that, and we see where we're at in that sort of consistency, then I can say, okay, I think now it's time we can pick a show and reverse engineer it 30 weeks out, and then we go into a cut. So that is how to do it the right way, but people don't always do that,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
you
And
know?
I'm glad you kind of mentioned like this, like spending a year to really put on muscle, because I think a lot, it takes effort to put on muscle, it takes food, it takes calories. There's a lot of things that go into building muscle. But I think so many ladies think like, oh, I'm going to get so bulky,
Right.
from lifting weights. And you're like, well, it's going to take you maybe a year to put on this muscle. But yeah, what do
Yeah.
you say to these ladies that are just afraid that they're going to get bulky?
So what I say to them is the weight training is not going to make you bulky. Your diet is what's going to make you bulky. So the
Mhm.
appearance of, and I actually just did a full podcast on this, which is funny. The appearance of looking bulky is simply that you have too much body fat that's layering over a muscle. So right now, people, I mean, just depending on what you think bulky is, a lot of people would look at me and they probably made me look at you and think, well, that's too bulky because we have definition, right? Like we have shoulders and muscles, and they'll be like, oh my God, that's too bulky. But when I lean out, I'm just shredded, right? And you can see the muscle and I don't look bulky. So the bulk part of it is going to be getting your diet under control and not thinking that because you need to put on muscle, you have to be in some crazy surplus. You can do that eating at maintenance or a little bit above and keep your body fat relatively low. And, for girls that are super, super new, they can recomp their bodies quite amazingly in the first year if they've never done weight training and they eat at like maintenance calories. And for those that aren't familiar with body recomposition, essentially what that means is when they start lifting weights, they start building muscle and dropping body fat. So they're exchanging body fat for muscle. And so they appear smaller and more compact. And sometimes the scale stays the same. And a lot of women aren't patient for that because they just rely on scale metrics for success. So you have to know that if you're feeling bulky, it's probably because your diet might be out of whack. You might need to bring your calories down. And honestly, the weight training is likely not the problem because as women, we do not carry enough testosterone to be walking out of the gym looking like Arnold, you know?
Yeah, it definitely takes effort. I mean, especially when you hit your 40s and beyond, like you really do
Mhm.
have to like try for that muscle.
Oh,
But I just
yeah.
love how you basically said like you can change how your body actually looks by just putting on some muscle. And yeah, it's like it's more compact, your clothes are going to fit better, you're going to have that like nice toned look. But yeah, everybody is so obsessed with the number on the scale, and it's just like I'd rather weigh a little bit more and look
Mhm.
really toned than like see a certain number on the scale. But I know I'm like preaching to the choir as I'm saying this to
Totally.
you.
No, I just did a
It's hard.
YouTube, I just did a YouTube vlog the other day and I was in my bikini, okay, of all things. I was just like, I'm doing a progress update. I haven't updated anybody because I'm not competing anymore. And I didn't expect for as many people to watch it as they did. I was like, oh my God. I woke up and I was like, 2,000 people have seen this video, freaking out a little bit. But everybody was just like, oh my gosh, I would have never guessed you were 151 pounds. Like I would have thought 135 or something like that. And it's just because it's more compact and muscle is a denser tissue.
Yeah, it just looks different. It just looks
Hmm.
different. Joke with our clients that you can eat more cookies if you have more muscle on your body.
Girl, I love
So
me some cookies. You are absolutely
yes,
right. I crumble
yes.
once a week over here. Okay.
Oh yeah, yeah. We have one near us. Yeah,
Yeah.
those are very good. Very good.
Hmm.
So another question for you. So I think this goes hand in hand with kind of like the bad side of bikini competitions and whatnot, is like what happens after the
Hmm.
show and like where can that go wrong? Because I think sometimes you hear these like horror stories of people like gaining all this weight like overnight and everything, but I'm sure there's like a right way to finish out this and
Yes.
like a wrong way to do it.
Yes, I have so much to say about this. How much time do we got?
Yeah.
Um, yes. So coming out of a show is very challenging because you have been in a very regimented and structured environment for extended periods of time, 30 weeks in the case of working with me. Some coaches are, 16 weeks, 20 weeks, whatever. And coming out of a show, you sort of are like, oh my gosh, like I get to eat all these things now. There's no rules, right? And a lot of times girls will, and men do this too, but because I have experience with women will kind of go off the rails and they'll start just eating everything and anything, right? Because they haven't been able to really have sweets or sugar or any of that fun stuff, and they start putting that stuff in. And that actually is one of the worst things, as I just got done talking about crumble cookies, because it sends a cascade of just negative effects after that, where they are like in this massive craving mode, and it is really, really hard to kick. So the hardest thing to do when you come out of a show is stick to another diet, because you don't have a show, right? Like if you decide you're just doing one show, it's really hard. Now, I always tell my athletes, I want them to stay on track with me for coaching for at least 8 weeks after a show so I can reverse diet them out. That is the hard part. That is the part nobody wants to do. That's the part everybody wants to just quit coaching with me and just be like, I'm not following anything. I'm kind of a mess, so I'm going to stop. And then they end up gaining 15, 20, 30. I've seen women gain 40 pounds post show. So what I always recommend is stay with your coach, have them reverse diet you, which some coaches don't know how to do that properly. But my clients that have been the most successful post show without having these massive rebounds are the ones that buckle down, they do the work, it's hard, and they reverse diet. And what that is simply we start to kind of reverse them out of all that cardio to bring their appetite down. And then I also reverse their calories down, or up, sorry. I reverse their calories up incrementally to get them at a healthier set point for maintenance. And for initially, it's a nice little bump that first week post show, but I have to be careful with that, because what a lot of women don't realize is after a show, you are incredibly depleted and your body is like a sponge ready to put on body fat. Okay. Because you have been so depleted that, if you're not careful, anything excess that you eat will get stored as body fat. So we have to taper that up, and eventually you'll recalibrate. It's not perfect. People get real squirrely. They have bad days, they have moments, but the takeaway from this is like you have to methodically move those calories up slowly so you do not see the scale shoot back up, and then you are looking in the mirror and you're freaking out because you don't recognize the person in the mirror that was on stage 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, right? And it is incredibly disheartening, and I have seen it wreck a lot of women's relationships with food, their body image, lots of dark side issues when it comes to post show stuff. It can send you into a massive depression.
Yeah, and I remember you mentioning that when we talked in person, just like that relationship with food. And I was like, oh, like I've been there, especially with like all my UC stuff where I was like literally like afraid of food and like overthinking everything. So I was like, I don't know if I want to go there with this.
Right. And
But
I'm
just
there too, like I've done so many shows that after I competed this last time, I got back into a place where I have like a really great relationship with food. I don't have FOMO. I don't feel like it constantly is consuming my thoughts, and I would love to compete again. I can't express that to you enough. Like I love competing. That is so much fun to me. It's like the best feeling being on stage. The only thing that holds me back is the diet piece of things, because I know that at some point I'm gonna get to 1100 calories and be restricted, and I just have no desire to be that hungry ever again.
Mhm.
You know,
Same,
yeah, I
same.
have no desire to be that hungry and that overly consumed with food in my brain ever again.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, same. I mean, I did the UC thing, obviously, that was like food sensitivities and
Yeah,
GI distress and whatnot. But even in my macro days, I remember just like obsessing over like the number of carbs and things and like just wanting to hit my macros. And it just like was all consuming. And I was just constantly thinking about food. And now it's part of my day, but like I'm not thinking
zero
about it
thought.
all the
Like
time.
I'm like
Yeah.
the most of my thought around food is like, okay, what protein am I eating? And then like, am I training today? If I'm training today, good. I'll probably have more carbs than when
Yep.
I don't train, but I don't track macros anymore. And it's really funny because I offer an online program and a coaching program that is macro based or meal plan, depending on what somebody wants to do. And I don't do either of those. But I always tell people like, I say that because this is where you want to eventually be, right? Like
Mhm.
I had to start there to understand what macros were and what's protein and what's carbs and like how do I fuel my body properly, and understand like meal timing and things like that for me to get to a point right now where I'm like, doesn't consume my thoughts. I can lose weight if I want to. I know what lever to pull in terms of like my macros.
Yeah, that's a great point. Because I mean, I think all of us at the end of the day, like we don't want to be thinking about food forever and always. Like I always make the joke, like when I'm an old lady, like in a nursing home, like I don't want to be thinking about food. I just want to eat and enjoy my life. So yeah, it's
Yeah.
definitely takes time to get there. But just as we wrap up this bikini competition
Yeah.
discussion, like, is there like any like major misconceptions or things that people just like don't understand or just information you'd want to share with somebody who's like kind of thinking about this or it's on their radar as a bucket list item or something like that, but just kind of those things that you might not know about this world just looking at it from the outside.
I am so glad you asked that question. Yes. So one thing I would love to let your audience know, if this is a bucket list goal, is that oftentimes the idea of competing is exciting because it'll push you to get to a certain level with your body. And I think that that's an admirable goal. However, this is actually a very intricate sport. And so I think it's great if you want to do it as a bucket list goal, but I want to make you very aware of the fact that because it is a sport, because it is an extreme sport and it's subjective and it draws in a big crowd that like compete on a very high level, which is like the Olympia, it's like the Super Bowl of bodybuilding. There is a dark side. And the dark side is that a lot of people don't realize is those bodies that you see on stage that are incredibly hard and chiseled and shredded oftentimes come with steroids. And I used to shy away from this conversation because it wasn't something I felt comfortable talking about. And then I think 2 years ago on my podcast, I was like, I'm going to rip the Band-Aid because women are signing up with coaches and doing all these things and thinking that they're going to look like that. And they don't realize that a lot of the women they see on Instagram, these big influencers who are bodybuilding, even the girls doing bikini, which is like the lower entry level bodybuilding division, are sometimes doing steroids. If they're in the pro ranks, I can almost bet that they are. There are very few that are natural, but in the amateur ranks as well, which is like when you're first starting, you will see a lot of women on stage who are already partaking in illegal fat burners, in steroids, and things of that nature. And I always, in full transparency, share my story because that is something that I did not do for probably half of my bodybuilding career. And I had reached my genetic potential for my physique. And at that point, I was faced with a decision and I really wanted to get my pro card. And, all the coaches that I'd worked with had all told me the same thing year after year. Like, if you want to get to that level, you're gonna have to do steroids. And I'm like, no. And I refused. And I pushed and I pushed and I pushed. And there was no way. So I did a very low level baseline. And this is not something I'm recommending for anybody, but I'm just, again, so you're very clear that this is something that is very heavily involved in the bodybuilding world.
No, that is interesting. I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
I mean, thought went through my head for sure, but I just figured, there was just some people did it. I didn't realize it was so prevalent. And that's just solely to build muscle.
Yeah. I mean, I have clients. So when they start with me, I will tell them when they first start coaching with me or they want to, I say, okay, I'm going to be very transparent with you. I give this speech to all of my girls who inquire about coaching or do a physique assessment that steroids are typically involved in the bodybuilding world. Not that you have to do that or it's anything I'm recommending, but I want to make you very aware of that because as we get to a certain point, the human body will only push so far. And yeah, so there are components of illegal fat burners, androgen type steroids. So you're like a lot of women are doing things like Anavar or testosterone or Winstrol. There's all these like big name kind of common steroids that girls are doing depending on what division they're competing in. And so you have like the bikini division, which is very entry level, and you'll see pros on stage. And I know pros that are in bikini that are doing, just a smattering of things. And then I've seen girls in the pro ranks that are doing a lot of steroids. And I'm like, okay, explains a lot. Your voice is definitely, your vocal cords have definitely thickened. And I know, like personally for myself, if I go back and listen to YouTube videos from like 10 years ago to now, I can tell the difference in my voice. So those are things that you have to be very aware of, if
No,
you
no
decide to
kidding.
do that. Hmm.
This is like all news. I feel like I have a million more questions for you.
Yeah, I mean,
So,
I got time. Yeah. But it's one of those things where I think that Instagram has made it this super cool thing, and we have like influencers and they look so healthy and oh my gosh, right? But the reality of it is that getting to that level of muscularity and leanness is very, very challenging as a woman. Our
yeah.
bodies are not meant to get that lean. We are built for procreation, right? And so our lower half is going to have a really hard time dropping body fat because it's a protective mechanism. And we unfortunately have to push past that. And that is one of the hardest things in bodybuilding.
Yeah, and a lot of this is like making sense now because obviously I've seen these competitors on stage and I'm like, holy hell, she's so lean but has so much muscle at the same time. So it kind of makes sense that maybe something may have been used to enhance results. So this
Yeah.
is
And the other
all
reason,
very interesting.
yeah, the other reason why it, is very widely used in the bodybuilding world is because you have to think about what you're trying to do, right? You're trying to strip your body down to freakishly low levels of body fat so you can see the muscle. Well, in that process, just by the nature of dieting, you're going to lose lean tissue. You're going to lose
Mhm.
muscle. And so, one of the reasons why bodybuilders also partake is because while they're dieting, they're going to keep more muscle than their natural counterparts. So, a lot of people are like, well, that's cheating and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, listen, I didn't just pound steroids and like sit on the couch and eat bonbons. Like I was in the gym, I was doing I was doing all the things. It definitely helps, but I still had to do, all the work. I didn't just like take a pill and like wake up and I was ready to be on stage. I wish it was, I wish it was that easy. Yeah.
Mhm, mhm. And that's something we talk to our clients about all the time. When they've got to that phase where they have earned the right to be in a fat loss phase, you can't really pick and choose if you're losing body fat or muscle. So like that's why
Yeah.
the strength training is so important. That's why, you got to get enough protein and all of that.
Most
Um,
definitely.
what are your thoughts on creatine? It's a hot topic over here.
Yes. Oh, good, good. No, creatine is amazing. I have all of my women on it, whether they're competing or not. It's fantastic. I don't feel like you have to do the whole loading phase. There's this controversy on like loading and all that fun
Right.
stuff. It's usually uncomfortable for most people. I say just toss it in every day, whether it's in a protein shake or just plain water or whatever. But as far as it being a good supplement for women, women freak out because they're like, oh, is it going to make me gain water weight and all this? I think the old products back in the day had, more incidences of that sort of side effect, but you don't see that as much right now. And it sort of tapers off anyways. But it is huge. And it also has been shown to help significantly with brain function. So not only is it incredible for muscle building and preserving muscle tissue, it's also great for our most important muscle in our our brain, So yeah, I'm a huge advocate. All my competitors I take it still even.
Yeah, same. I take it every day. I think it's
Mm,
great. And it's one of those like, I feel like it's a low hanging fruit in the sense that like it's
totally.
easy just to throw in whatever. It's pretty cheap. Like you don't have to buy anything fancy. If it just says
Yes.
creatine monohydrate, you're good to
Right.
go. You know what I mean? It's just
Precisely.
easy. It's
It's
an easy
relatively
option.
cheap. It's hell.
Mhm.
It's safe, right? It's not
Oh
doing
yeah. So many
anabolic
studies.
steroids.
Mhm.
Yeah. I mean, granted, is it going to do the same as something like, being an enhanced athlete? No, but it is going to give you that much more of an edge on somebody who's not using it for sure.
Mhm. Mhm. I agree 100%.
Hmm.
This has been fascinating. I feel like I need to get you back here because I do have more questions, and we didn't even
I'd love
talk about
that.
like mindset behind all of this because I think that would be
100%.
really interesting for sure.
We can do a
Um,
part two for sure.
yes, it's like we're going to need a
Hmm.
part two. But as we wrap up here, I always ask my guests a couple of just fun questions just to kind of get to know them. But what would you say is your superpower?
Funny you should ask that. I was actually asked that recently in the other business mastermind that I'm in, is we had to ask our, team to tell us what our superpower was. Cause I'm like, I don't know what my superpower is. And my head trainer on my staff, who's one of my best friends, she said, your superpower is the ability to see things in people that they don't see for themselves in terms of their gifts, their abilities, sort of motivating them to do more than they think they can. So as she said that, I'm like, yeah, I feel like that's kind of like what I'm screaming at the soapbox for all the time, is just like, if I could do this, you could do this. Like, I am not a special human. I am not. I just persevered and was consistent and was determined more than anything. So that's my superpower, is making sure everybody else knows that they can too do the same thing.
Oh, I love that. I mean, it's as a coach too, but I love that. I love that.
Yeah.
Have you ever done the Enneagram test by any chance?
I think I have. Somebody else asked me that the other day,
Yeah,
and
I
I
was gonna
have,
say.
and I don't remember what it is.
If you might be a three, because I'm a three as well. And I think that's
Mm.
something that is very similar. Like, I just
Okay.
feel like so much potential in other people. You just have to
Mm.
figure out like how to get them there. So I don't know.
Yes.
I just wonder if there's a lot of threes that are
And
coaches, you
coaches.
know what I mean? As
Yeah, I'm
far
gonna
as,
have to go back and take it because that definitely sounds on
mhm.
brand.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you
Yeah.
read through the description, it's very entrepreneur-y as
Yeah, makes
well. So
sense.
just like a type of person.
Yeah.
Um, Anyways, and then what would you say your favorite life hack is as far as your health or your routine or just something that makes your life easier?
Probably staying to like a schedule. I know that sounds silly, but like, really planning things out and making sure that I'm not kind of flying by the seat of my pants. I always feel like I have some kind of goal, whether it's a business goal, a life goal, a personal goal. And I think that that's important, to just have some area where you want to improve that maybe you need some help with. And for me, that comes down to scheduling everything, putting things in a planner, making sure everything lives in real time, like my workouts, or if I have a goal I'm trying to achieve with my business, that much like my body, I am putting in specific, milestones to make sure that I'm on track with that. So it's really just being organized with your time more than anything.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
love that and agree. I'm the same way. Like if I have a goal or like something specific that I want to achieve, it's all about writing it down and just taking those small steps. It just keeps you accountable essentially to yourself and your goals.
Yeah.
So,
One tool I'm loving right now that helps me with productivity and kind of keeping everything in alignment with my personal life and my business life is this new AI scheduling tool. It's called Motion AI.
ooh,
And
okay.
there's a little bit of a learning curve, I'm not gonna lie, but it has been amazing. I have ADHD, and so I have a hard time like I feel like everything is always 800 browsers open at once, like in my brain and on my computer. And so it's great because you can dump all of your tasks in there, things that are floating around in your head. And what it does, it will auto assign these tasks based on what you give it as terms of like how important it is on your calendar. So you can't make excuses. You'd be like, oh, I have this big, huge time block. And I said that this was a priority. Motion goes ahead and puts it in there. And then once you complete a
Hmm.
task, what it does is it shuffles things around to move your next important thing in order. It's wonderful. And I have my whole
Oh,
team on it as well. So I have like the team plan. So like 5 of my team are on there and I can shoot. It's kind of like a Slack or one of those kind of, project sort of productivity tools. But it's great if you I don't know if you have like a day to day, like 9 to 5. It might not be, it might be a little too much, but if you are self employed, that type of thing, entrepreneur, it's really, really great. They have like a 2-week trial. If you want, I can give you, I think I have like a free link if you want to try it out.
Yeah, I'll definitely check it out. I love
Yeah,
stuff like that because
I
I'm
do
always
too.
about like, what's the best way to keep myself
My
organized?
God, girl, I've been fighting that. I have like planners and notebooks and all these things. And I just, we have ClickUp and Slack and just all that. And it just wasn't like resonating with me. And then the AI piece of this was just so nice. It's super intuitive.
Oh, cool. I'll definitely
Mhm.
check it out. I wrote it down. So
Yeah.
thank
Yeah. It's really
you
cool.
for that. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Well, anyways, thank you so much for being here. Like I said, we probably need a part two because I do have more questions for you. But yeah, as we wrap up here, do you want to just tell people where they can find you, how they can listen to your podcast, products, like all
Yeah.
that good.
Absolutely. Sure. I appreciate that. So if you are in California and you're near the Central Valley, we're located in Modesto. So I have a personal training studio there that is exclusively for women who want to be baddies. And, most of my clients there range from 30 to 70, most of them in their 40s. And that's in Modesto. We're venusfitnessstudio.com. And then I also have a podcast and online programs as well. Our signature program is the Goddess Body Project, which is a 12-week program. And that is reopening up again in September. So all that information is usually on the website, which is bossbitchradio.com. And on the webs is, or on Instagram is Venus Fitness Studio and then Diane Flores, IFBB Pro.